Good evening, Flagstaff and our greater lived Black experience community. Today is really one of those broadcasts that we've been looking forward to for probably since we scheduled it. Very humbled this evening to be a part of this presentation, which is on truth, justice, and reconciliation. And it is with this broadcast that, if some of you who have been following us, and if you have not, please go back and I'll try to find out and post the exact time that we had Pastor McCauley on, and it was, I think, during the summer, late summer, where we had a discussion about reparations and reconciliation. These are those hard topics, and this is indeed a difficult one this evening. The scripture says that my people perish for lack of knowledge, and we present these broadcasts to you in order to educate, inform, and enlighten. And it is this evening's conversation that it is indeed our prayer that we will do just that. When we talk about trauma, and particularly the trauma that has been experienced by the descendants of those African slaves that were brought here to the United States, that is a very humbling conversation, even thought. And so that is why we're here this evening. I'm very happy, as always, to have our resident facilitator, Sister Kara House. And Sister Kara, let's get right into this deep conversation this evening with these fine men of God.
Absolutely. And my role is going to be a little bit different this evening, as I am just here to introduce tonight's facilitator, Mr. Jermaine Barkley, as well as our panelists. Jermaine Barkley is Assistant Vice Chair of the African Diaspora Advisory Council for Coconino County and Chairman of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Leadership Council for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Arizona. He completed his Bachelor of Science in Psychology at Northern Arizona University and his Master of Arts in Sociology at Arizona State University. He has been a resident of Coconino County for 9 years and has worked in the fields of criminal justice, social work, psychology, and healthcare administration. He is currently the first episode Psychosis Grant Coordinator for Health Choice Arizona. We are also joined this evening by a panel of local clergymen who will be speaking on these topics tonight. First up, I will introduce Elder Leonard L. Bryant, who has pastored Riverside Church of God in Christ for the past 5 years. Prior to pastoring Riverside, he served in several positions within the Arizona, Missouri, and Tennessee COGIC jurisdictions, including service as a deacon, minister, district choir president, and youth pastor. A United States Army veteran and proud husband and father, he also holds a bachelor's degree in Christian theology. Up next, we have Reverend Richard of Prince Chapel AME Church. Reverend Gerald P. Richard II, Esquire, serves as pastor of Prince Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Tucson, Arizona. Reverend Richard is an attorney who practices criminal law. He has served as a member of the Department of Justice Institute for Intergovernmental Research, where he was a member of the IIR After Action Assessment Team for Ferguson, Missouri. He retired after serving as director of the Phoenix Police Department, where he oversaw the community services, legal support, and administrative support divisions. Next, we have Pastor McCallie of the Commons Church. Charlie McCallie is the senior pastor at the Commons Church in Flagstaff, Arizona. His postgraduate degree is from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, where he studied postcolonialism, biomedical ethics, and the relationship of science and faith. He is also a political activist in the areas of immigration, climate change, and civil rights. Next, we have Reverend Moore of Harbor Chapel AME Church. Reverend Corey L. Moore is an ordained elder of the African Methodist Episcopal Church and pastor of Harbor Chapel AME Church in Flagstaff, Arizona. Reverend Moore has earned an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, 2 master's degree, and is currently pursuing his doctoral degree. Reverend Moore currently works at Grand Canyon University as a faculty specialist and adjunct faculty. He teaches psychology at several of the Maricopa Community College. He is the CEO of Black Champions, LLC, working to help African American males and others to discover their potential, grasp their power, and live their purpose. And finally, we have Pastor Williamson of Church of the Nations, Flagstaff. Pastor Daniel Williamson and his family have lived and served the people of Flagstaff for over 25 years. Having founded multiple nonprofits from churches to group homes, Daniel has a unique approach to seeing the intrinsic value of people be restored and celebrated. Daniel is known as a problem solver, regardless of how small or large the issue at hand may be. Pastor Daniel received his doctorate of ministry with an emphasis in leadership and cultural transformation in 2016. And with that, I will hand the conversation now over to Mr. Barkley.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And thank you everyone who's joined us for this conversation. Like we kind of said up front, these conversations can be difficult. So the fact that you're willing to spend time out of your afternoons and evenings with us, listening to these respected gentlemen kind of give their perspective on this topic, it is really honorable, and we appreciate it. The conversation that we have at hand today is twofold when you think about it. Looking at truth and reconciliation, we have to talk about restorative justice. That's a broad, overarching topic with a lot of complexities woven in between, but we're going to try to go ahead and tackle that on 2 fronts. First, talking about restorative justice as a concept, how it works in the criminal justice system, and some thoughts around that, and also what that means for making amends and atoning for some of the transgressions and harm done historically to our people in the Black community. So without further ado, let me just go ahead and kind of give a brief framework overview of restorative justice, the concept, and then we'll launch into some questions that all of our clergymen can jump in at any point. So restorative justice, it repairs the harm caused and hurt. It emphasizes accountability, making amends, and if they're interested, it facilitates meetings between victims, offenders, and other persons. It views crime and harm as more than just breaking the law. And it also causes harm, crime also causes harm to people, relationships, in the community. And so a response to address harms is to address not only the harm, but the wrongdoing. If the parties are willing, the best way to do this is to help them meet to discuss those harms and bring about resolution. And then sometimes those meetings can lead to transformational change. The 3 big ideas behind reconciliation and restorative justice is that it repairs. So crime causes harm, and justice requires repairing that harm. 2, it encourages the best way to determine how to do that by having the parties decide together. And then it's transformational. It brings about fundamental changes in people, relationships, and communities. If restorative justice were a building, it'd have 4 main kind of pillars or counterposts. It would include all parties involved. It would encounter the other side. It would make amends for the harm, and it would reintegrate all parties into the community in a holistic way. So without further ado, let's launch right in with our first question, and I open it up to all of you. What does justice mean to you? First one's always the hardest one.
I have no problem jumping in on this one, especially since it's something that I've been doing now for quite some time. Let's just put it like that. Justice, at least to me, because I deal with the criminal justice system so much, is something where you find a certain point that fairness is established. When we turn to the Bible, the first thing we think about is Solomon, King Solomon, and the decision that he made, and the balance with regards to the wrong that was done and whom would be harmed the most, and how to come out with a decision based on divine wisdom that would satisfy everyone, but also be fair to everyone. And so, regardless of whether or not you're talking about the criminal justice system or you're talking about other decisions that have to be made, like such as in civil court, you have to find a fairness. You have to find a balance. And so that's what justice means to me.
Thank you for that, Reverend.
I'll jump into that question as well. And thank you, Reverend Richard, for your service in the criminal justice and civil court system. And I applaud you for that. Justice to me, first, is a matter of the gospel. It is to me a gospel issue. Knowing that justice is not just a thread that's woven throughout Scripture, but it's a key thread that carries the message of the gospel all throughout history. And so when I think about justice from a gospel perspective, justice is not an option. Justice is an actual commandment that God gives to us. You know, we have the wonderful passage of Scripture in Micah chapter 6, where he tells us that we are to do justice, we're to love mercy, and we're to walk humbly with our God. And again in Isaiah chapter 56, there's an assumption possibly when the author tells us to maintain justice, as though justice is something that can be reached and therefore can be maintained and sustained even as cultures evolve, as societies transition and so forth. Justice has to be at the forefront, especially of my heart as a messenger of the gospel. It has to remain a gospel issue to me, which means, again, as Reverend Richard had said, that I'm aware of where injustice currently exists. And therefore now I'm responsible to bring the equality of the gospel that provides fairness and equitable solutions for the parties that are involved in that. And so it's to me, it's much more than just a topic. It's a commandment that God asks us to keep highlighted and prioritized in our approach, not just to ministry, but our approach to life and relationships.
Thank you so much for that, Pastor Daniel.
And I think in conjunction with that, I think Reverend Richards kind of mentioned it, that it is this balance and a place of restoring balance to the community. But it's also a place of accountability. There has been something that has been done that created a disruption in the community that now needs to be balanced out. And for the person that caused the unjust event, they have to have an accountability for it. But we'll talk about other things related to restorative justice that has to do with the victim in the situation. But that victim also needs to have some sense that they're concerned about their infliction is now being addressed by the community and acknowledged to some extent, because sometimes there are people that experience an activity that their affliction or their assault goes without notice or acknowledgement, and they have no sense of restoration within the community. And so I think it's about maintaining that balance. Yes, that was something wrong. And yes, we need to find this balance of bringing this person to where they feel like they're acknowledged. And then we'll talk about it later on, probably building that connection or strengthening that relationship. But it's about, to me, bringing a balance to the community.
Thank you for that, Reverend. Pastor Bryant?
Yes, sir. Certainly, I agree with what has been said already. There is a certain line within the theology, and especially in Christian theology, that kind of dictate that the primary reason that Christ came was to disperse justice, right? The inequities that were happening between man. I'm not one in that line. I think the grace and mercy were at the forefront of his responsibility as he came to earth. But as I think about justice, both from a spiritual standpoint and then also take it into context, as I was thinking, because certainly I know the justice is, you try to accomplish fairness, balance, equity. And as I was going through that process of thinking about what justice really means to me, I ventured off slightly and thought, what has justice become for you? And it's somewhat different, because what I started thinking about is the mechanisms that are utilized to try to achieve justice. And are those mechanisms equal? Are those mechanisms fair? Are those mechanisms equity, have equity in them? And so what justice has become to some is slightly different what the achievable state should be. And so I'm thinking on that, and my hope and prayer is that at some point we can bring alignment to what Christ wanted justice to be and to what actually is administered throughout this nation and throughout this world.
Thank you for that, Pastor Bryant. And what about you, Pastor McCauley?
Yeah, I agree with all those guys. It's tough to follow those four. I just agree. I would just concur that, to me, well, actually, I watched a movie last night, and everybody watching right now, Jermaine just dropped this question on us like 8 minutes before this started, so we didn't really have a lot of time to think about this. But my wife and I watched this movie last night, and it was like a deep sea fisherman who was obsessed with catching this huge fish. And this old fisherman on land said, "You got to name that fish," and he named the fish Justice. And I thought that was actually kind of a powerful moment in the movie, because it was kind of representing that justice is always this thing that we can't quite get to. It's like something we all want, but it seems like we always fall short, like this fish we're trying to catch. And the other thing that I would say is that it must be tangible. It's like one of those ideas in philosophy, like love. It's great to think about love and write poetry, but if you're not actually loving another human being, if love isn't made manifest in a physical, tangible way, love really is just an idea, and it's not that great. And justice even more so. It's something that I think people tend to talk a lot about, think a lot about, but have a much harder time making it manifest, incarnating justice in the world. And I think that's a central tenet. I think that's what James was talking about when he says, you say, I wish you warm and well fed, but you don't do anything. It's like, yeah, you want justice, but you're not doing anything about it. It's got to be made manifest, but it's a big topic. I think we covered it though.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, and I'm seeing some recurring themes here. Namely, I think what you just said was very astute, that it's a responsibility of taking justice from a concept to an action. It's continual work. So like I said in the beginning of this conversation, we're kind of framing this twofold, talking about the criminal justice system, but also the concept of restorative justice as it relates to the history of our people in America, as Black Americans specifically. The next question that I want to ask you all is, so when you hear this phrase restorative justice, because we just talked about what justice means to us, when you hear restorative justice thrown out there, what does that mean to you, and why do you think there's a difference between justice and restorative justice when we have these discussions?
I'll jump in and try to bring some clarity from my perspective, and all of the attempts to achieve justice. I think every attempt has had a pure origin, and then at some point the line has gotten misinterpreted or misunderstood by others who who weren't a part of that origin. For example, when we start to talk about social justice or even racial justice, just that in and of itself causes there to be a division amongst not just individuals, but entire groups. And when there's division amongst groups, then automatically justice takes a back seat, and who can get the higher hand according to their particular group is what really begins to be prioritized. And so I think at the core of restorative justice, I think we have to be very mindful of that tendency to segregate things into groups rather than just keeping justice as its purity, as its core, the foundation. And I think that's where we can really begin to see things restored, when we break the walls of division that by categorizing justice automatically infers, but by removing those categorical ways of justice trying to be achieved and just keeping justice as a core, then it lends way for restorative justice to really take place. When I think about restorative as well, just at its root core, to restore is to give back, to add balance, and to make sure that there's an equitable return on anything that may have been lost or taken over the course of injustice. And so when you move back into the core of justice and restorative nature, man, it's a giving back. And I'm not talking in this topic alone as just something of material value. I'm talking about the intrinsic value of humanity, the value that each person holds, being created in the very image and bearing the reputation of God. To see restorative justice take place means that we recognize and empower each other according to that original identity.
Thank you for that, Pastor Daniel. And I saw Reverend Richard, you were about to jump in. Go ahead.
Pastor Daniel, I really commend you on those views. And before I go any further, I know this is primarily for the Flagstaff area, but I have to give a shout out to my listeners from Tucson, Arizona, from Prince Chapel, who have tuned in this evening, because we're supposed to be having Bible study tonight. And they said, we're going to follow you, Pastor. And so I sincerely appreciate it. And I know for the rest of you, you may have members from your Bible study listening to you as well. But let me go back to the restorative justice issue, because initially when I think of restorative justice, I used to review grants. And the first time I had heard of it, it was for a restorative justice program within the Native American nation. And it was amazing to me, because when I first saw it, it was where the victim was willing to get together with whoever the offender was and sit down and discuss what happened, how it impacted them, and how they would like to some extent, forgive them for what they did, or to reach some sort of agreement. There are crimes where individuals can't sit down like that. Sexual assault, where you can't sit down like that. Homicides, you can't sit down like that, especially if it was your child, your mother, your daughter, your brother, your father. And so when you talk about restorative justice in those examples, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. So when you take it to the level of, like Pastor Daniel was talking about, saying, well, let's take it where there's social issues, racial issues, issues dealing with women. We can approach that, and we can have individuals who are willing to sit down in order to try to bridge that gap, in order to try to make it better for the future generations. But there are going to be those that were hurt so bad, I'm sorry, they are not going to come to the table, and they're going to hold on to those feelings. And sometimes when you take a look at some of the atrocities that have occurred, and we talk about just the Tuskegee study, for instance, with COVID going on, there are a whole lot of people, Black people, who still don't trust the government because of what happened. 632 men went through that. And you tell me now you want to give me a shot that's going to help me? there are those that we have to convince, and that's why it's so important for individuals such as ourselves who are leaders within our churches to be able to take that first shot, to say it's okay, to say this is the part of justice that we can trust, because we're all in this together, and it's on a global sense. And so as a result, when we look at it, let us go into it with open eyes, knowing doggone well that everybody is not coming to the table, nor will they want to come to the table. But we have to continue to move on, and then we have to be able to show the next generation how to overcome that. Why? Because individuals are not born bigots. However, what they may be taught by others can lead to incidents such as we saw January the 6th.
Thank you for that, Reverend Richard. Go ahead, Pastor Bryant.
Yeah, I'm blown away by what I just heard so far from both Pastor Richard and Pastor Daniel. I would like to add one component to this in terms of restorative justice. You know, when I think about it, I said first, many times we have to take enough time to really identify who the victims are, right? Who the victims are. Sometimes if you don't properly go through the process, identify who has been hurt, who has been wronged, who has actually gone through the process of being in an inequitable situation, then you'll never get to the point where you can actually even have a discussion of any substance, right? The other component of this is, and I'm glad we're having this in conversation in the context of spirituality and not Christianity, because the truth is, and I wholeheartedly agree with what Pastor Reverend Richard was saying, but with one little anecdote added: without Christ, we'll never get there. Without Christ, we'll never get there. Without Christ, I cannot put aside all of the pains of yesteryear. The formulas that we use, and I was talking about earlier, the mechanisms that we utilize to obtain justice, the mechanisms that we utilize to obtain to enter into restorative justice will not be sufficient, right, to bridge the gaps and the hurt and the pain and the disillusioned individuals and the generational curses that have been put in place because of that. They won't do it. Only Christ can change the heart of man to come to that point. So, and I think my responsibility, and I'm sure others may share it, is to continue to promote Christ and his healing mechanisms and his justice and put that into the equation. And hopefully some of that might be adopted into the world.
Yeah, I just wanted to say what helps me a lot, especially regarding what you were saying, Reverend Richard, about victims not wanting to come to the table. I first learned about restorative justice in the context of the Rwandan genocide and just the horrific story of Hutus and Tutsis. These are Christian groups killing each other to the tune of 800,000 people with machetes. It's just a horrific. And so when restorative justice was placed there, it piqued my interest following Desmond Tutu and other great leaders from South Africa. And it's centered in victims. Victims certainly don't have to come to the table. Restorative justice doesn't have to put perpetrators and victims together for those very reasons you wisely put out. So what I very simply come back to all the time is I contrast restorative justice to punitive justice. And I think about it anthropologically, because anthropologists would talk about spiral dynamics or the way in which people groups interact. And our justice system and most of our justice philosophies are stuck in a red level barbarian punitive system, that punishment and fear is the way to control society. And unfortunately, that's always wielded by people groups who have power or leverage. And I think in the clergy context, we can talk about, as Pastor Leonard was just talking about, I think in Christ we see a different, higher level of anthropology that does restore. It's not punitive. The goal is human flourishing for everybody involved, and that includes the perpetrators as well. That's true liberation. It's liberation for victims and it's liberation for the perpetrators. I think that's the radical idea that Christianity can bring to this conversation, whether it's from its Jewish roots and liberation from Exodus or Christ's obvious liberation narratives. I think that's something we can center this conversation on.
And just to follow up, I guess, and thinking about this, I came across two verses. The first one's Proverbs 21:15. It says, "When justice is done, it is a joy to the righteous, but dismay to the evildoer." and that kind of gets back to what Pastor Colley was just saying, is that there's this idea that being punitive and punishing the individual is where the justice system should lie. It's about getting them because they got me, and we need to make sure that I am right. I feel like I've received justice, that my afflictions have been addressed, that I have had my thing dealt with, and the person who harmed me is now receiving their punishment or their due. And so that kind of gets at that verse. But I like Zechariah 7:9. It says, "This says the Lord of hosts, render judgment, show kindness and mercy to one another." So that, and I think that's where restorative justice comes in. That it's about rendering judgment. We're not going to get rid of that pace, but how do we show kindness? How do we show mercy to one another? And I think even in those cases, because Reverend Richard, you my big brother in ministry, but I know that there are individuals out there that have made that step to the table, that have lost a loved one or have been a rape victim, and they have sat down with their offender and have talked to them and figure out how to get to this place to where they are showing this mercy and kindness a lot, because they know it helps restores them as well as it helps restores the individual. And so it gets them to this place. And I think that's part of the conversation, is talking to people about the benefit, not just on getting justice, but also on feeling, getting to that place to where they can be comfortable with the pain that they're suffering. And they know that, that person is spending the rest of their life in prison, but we have had this conversation and I can forgive them and move on with the rest of my life. And I think that's an important conversation to have, even with those individuals, is to get them to that place to where they can walk in forgiveness, because it is scripture that if we don't forgive our brother, then God said, I can't forgive you. And so that is a conversation to have with those who are out there. And I think restorative justice opened that door. The one thing I would say is that you wouldn't force somebody to that table. If a person is ready to go to that table or they're open to go to that table, then it's allowing them to take that step if they feel like they ever want to, or if they're ready. Yeah, I would say I would encourage it. But I would never try to forcibly tell somebody to go sit at a table if they're not at that place to where they want to.
I want to pose this question to all of you. What do you say to someone that's in our community? Says, look, I've been hurt by the criminal justice system. I've been hurt by politicians. I've been hurt by my white brothers and sisters. I don't way forward because they hurt me. Why should I do that? What do you say to someone, maybe a young Black woman, Black man, who's struggling with bringing themselves to that table?
I think the first thing that I would say, especially in the very specific context of a young Black or woman or man, is that they're right. They were hurt by whiteness or white supremacy or the criminal justice system, because there cannot be restoration without reconciliation, and reconciliation requires that things are put to right. And so I think the first step, and I'd love to see everybody else go after that, I think the first step is acknowledging the truth of that hurt and recognizing that they're not wrong, that they've been very specifically hurt in a very specific way.
Thank you for that, Pastor McCauley. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? What do you say to someone who's struggling to come to the table and have that conversation?
Man, those are such tender topics, because the last thing that we want to see is that wound or that trauma perpetuated in their own internal coping mechanisms, to see it replayed again. And so the risk of coming to the table is obviously very high, but there's a greater risk in my book of not coming to the table, and maybe not coming to the table in a physical manner, but coming to the table to where you can yes, as Pastor Charlie had mentioned, acknowledge the truth of the trauma, but then just providing a pathway for healing. And, the scripture talks about you'll know the truth and the truth will set you free. And again, I'm not an expert on how generational curses make their way down through generations, with the exception of one. And Jesus says it in John's gospel when he breathes on his disciples and says, receive the Holy Spirit. For if you forgive men their sins, they're forgiven. But if you retain those sins, then you retain them. And what I've seen happen, and it just has great consequences, and it's how I've seen generational sin be passed down from generation to generation, is the sin that was done to us. When we harbor that and we don't offer forgiveness, then the sin that was done to us very quickly becomes the sin that we start to have done through us. And that's just the concept of unforgiveness. Man, we harbor that very same sin. And then just when pressure comes on, that which is on the inside has an opportunity to have an outlet. And many times it's the very same trauma that was done to us have been done through us. So I would say that the consequence of not at least coming to the table of forgiveness has a much greater consequence attached to it, because now that trauma has an opportunity to be generational.
I have to say that, and I commend both of the comments, but I have to say before even getting to sharing that with a young African-American male in particular, and female as well, I have to relate to them. I have to be able to let them know what I've been through or how I'm standing with them as far as them making that transition. And in doing so, I think of a time when it was the last demonstration when I used to oversee demonstrations for the city of Phoenix, and God blessed us. We didn't have one riot, not one, in the 21 years that I was there. But the last night I was walking with a young man, and walking down the street, and I said, "What's your home church?" And he said, "My home church." He says, "I don't go to church." He said, "That's the problem with all these pastors. They try to get you to come into the church. They don't know how to come out to the street. They don't know how to talk to you on your own turf right there in the park, or maybe, on your doorstep." And I said, "There's a pastor out here tonight." And he said, "Where?" I said, "I'm a pastor." And he's like, "Really? I thought you worked for the police." "I do work for the police." And then we kept walking a little bit further, and I said, "Are you in school?" He said, "Why should I go to school?" He said, "Those teachers don't care about us." And I kept walking. I said, "There's a teacher out here tonight." He said, "Where?" I said, "I'm a teacher. I teach over at Northern Arizona University." "Really?" And so by doing that, I was able to establish a relationship with him and then get him to come to the table the very next morning. But I had to be able to establish that relationship. And I realized that for Pastor McCauley and Pastor Williamson, when you're talking to an African-American male, that may be a little bit difficult. They'll look at you and they may say, "What are you talking about?" And when you go to share with them your trials and tribulations, they may not be able to relate to it. But when you look at a young man and say, "Man, I really like your hair, and do me a favor, don't lose it, because mine used to be out like this." And they're like, "Yeah, really?" And you start breaking it down in such a way whereby they feel comfortable with you. Then you can talk about restorative justice. You can talk about reconciliation. You can talk about coming together at Christ's table, breaking bread, and being able to build the relationship that's necessary first within themselves and God, and then with others.
Thank you for that, Reverend. Go ahead, Pastor Bryant.
It's beautiful words been said. I'm soaking it all in. One of the things, it is, it's a personal thing, and it really depends upon the individual you're talking to, right? If the individual is seeking Christ then we go back to what Reverend Moore was saying concerning you have to forgive. You put the prerequisites in terms of how we move forward. How many times will an individual do you wrong? 7 times 7, you got to forgive them. You put those things in front of them. But I'm thinking more outside of the box. And the individual who may not be really in the church, an individual just from different walks of life, who may not want to hear platitudes when we're talking about this subject. And you have to acknowledge certain things. One is the individual who if you will, I'll use a phrase that may be charged, but the perpetrator may not ever really acknowledge that he has caused you any pain at all. The system may not ever come and say that there was any inequity that was established. And so for that individual, right, to start giving them platitudes, he's not going to receive it. But what I have to do is look at this individual and say, you have to rise above it. You have to rise above it. You have no choice. You have one life to live. You carrying the weight of all of the pain of yesteryear is not going to make a path for you and your family going forward. So some way, somehow, within all that's within you, you've got to rise above these circumstances. Be better. We have done this as a people for years and years. Be better, grow stronger, go higher, because that's the only way that we're going to achieve. And that's my conversation to an individual who may not be in the church, but still needs that guidance concerning their life.
You know, if I can jump in just one more second.
That's a great response. Of course, please.
I'm sorry, Reverend Moore.
Go ahead, sir.
In the criminal justice system, it's funny because I get a chance to meet individuals every day. And they're here, they see me as their court-appointed attorney, in essence, their public defender. And every once in a while, I get an opportunity when I'm talking with them to say, they say, well, this is what happened, and that's what happens. And I say, excuse me. I said, what's your home church? And the look on their face is like, what? I said, what's your home church? I said, you know, I really want you to tune into your home church. I said, because I see something that's really good in you that is coming through, and I want you to be better. Just like Brian was saying, I want you to be better. And I know that with the support that you can overcome this alcoholism, you can overcome this issue as far as prostitution. And they have the support there in order to help get you there. And they look at me and say, I've never had a public defender like you. I said, and I hope you never have to have another one like me, so you don't have to come back to the system. And the other thing that was always so good and something that people want to hear, it's a simple word. And I want to say it was Pastor McCauley that said, it may have been Pastor Williamson, but I'm sorry. I will never forget, especially in the position that I was in at the level of assistant chief, the only civilian at that level, I would get these calls that would come directly from the citizens. And people would say, they told me to call you. And I said, okay. I said, tell me what happened. And this one man, I remember, he was from Oklahoma. He came in for, I think, a funeral or whatever it was. There was a mistaken identity. The police came to the house, drug him outside the house, put handcuffs on him in front of his entire family and everything, and he was embarrassed. And after he told me the story, I said, and he said, you know, after they realized they had made a mistake, they just walked away. They didn't say anything to me. And I would always say, on behalf of the police chief and all the men and women of the Phoenix Police Department, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that happened to you. And I will never forget that one particular guy said, that's all I wanted. He said, okay, you all have a good day, and went on his way. Sometimes just taking whoever it was that said a little bit earlier about the perpetrator not even realizing what they did was wrong. But when they do realize it, just to say, I'm sorry.
Thank you for that, Reverend. Go ahead, Reverend Moore.
I was just going to kind of follow up on that. I know that I think Pastor Brian, as well as Pastor Richard, had mentioned and I think even Reverend McCauley had mentioned it, that the system sometimes, because it's a system, there's no direct apology. There's nowhere to get forgiveness. And sometimes that's not going to come from any particular individual. Some individuals are content at their behavior, and they ain't got no desire to make no apology or to do reconciliation. And so for those individuals, and getting back to forgiveness, there are two things that's not essential for forgiveness. One is you don't have to forget. Two is that you don't have to feel like you've been forgiven. Forgiveness is a decision not to hold that person's wrongdoing against them, and not even to hold the consequences against them. It's a conscious choice within myself to say that I'm going to forgive you, and I am going to allow you, whatever happened with you and the rest of your life, that's fine, but I'm not going to carry this baggage of feeling angry about what you have done to me. I am releasing you from my life. I am allowing you to exit my brain so that I can move on and allow you to be. And so I would talk with that young brother or sister about that process, because you can become entrapped to what people say to you. I once had a brother tell me, and I say he's a friend and with the true heart. He is a friend, but he once told me, he said, Corey, you know what? I like you, but all of your other people, I can't deal with him. I'm like, those people involve my mother, my brother, my sister, like, but I can't hold that against him because that's his view. But that is his view. He said we pretty cool, we good, we okay. He even invited me to his wedding, but he wouldn't invite anybody else to his wedding of the same complexion. But I can't allow that to hold me down. I've once had a person, a former supervisor, tell me to put something in alphabetical order, and that should take me all day. And I had a master's degree. And it's like, really? Like, what, are you calling me lazy or dumb? Which one? But I have to allow that person to be who they are, forgive her what she said, and move on, because if I hold that, it's impacting me much more so than it's impacting them. And I think I heard sometime, I think the saying goes, never let a person have rent-free space in your mind, however they go. And so I've learned to try to apply that. Like, don't allow a person to rent-free space in your mind. Deal with it within yourself, forgive that person, but know that you don't have to forget, and you don't have to feel like you're forgiven. It's a decision that I'm going to forgive you, and I'm going to move on with the rest of my life.
Thank you for that, Reverend Moore. And that brings up a question then that I want to ask. So we talked about the folks who have been hurt, the process of forgiveness coming to the table, but reconciliation, specifically in restorative justice, requires, every party involved to have a conversation, to come up with solutions, to atone for the hurt. So I guess my question is, on the flip side of this conversation we've been having, when you've got a system or an individual who does not feel any responsibility, maybe you get involved with fixing the system. Maybe you've got a white individual who says, I'm not privileged, I'm in a lower income bracket, I'm not racist, why should I devote energy into solving a problem I'm not, quote unquote, feeding into? How do you get those individuals involved? How do you convince kind of the lay public to come to the table on the flip side of that?
I got another story for you. I was chairing the Arizona Supreme Court's Commission on Minorities. And it was at a time when cultural awareness training was being introduced, especially to law enforcement. And we went to the Supreme Court Justice and we said, Chief Justice, and said that we believe that judges should go through cultural awareness training. And you would not believe the tsunami of feedback that we got saying that, how dare you call us biased? We're judges. We laughed. And so Chief Justice Lackett was incredible. He went ahead and mandated that they go through it. And so many in their evaluations talked about, I didn't realize, and this was before we start talking about implicit bias. I didn't realize what I was harboring and what other individuals were going through and what they saw when they walked into the courtroom and saw that individual sitting in my position and what kind of justice they were hoping for. I didn't realize it. But it's the kind of thing that we have to do over and over and over and over again. And when you have someone at that level, because you were talking about, I don't have any money, I'm this, that, and the other thing. When you talk at that level, you can imagine what it's like for the individual that you described, because they're saying, wait a minute, I wasn't the one that lynched anybody. I wasn't the one that wrote the laws. I didn't write the Jim Crow law. I wasn't even around. I didn't tell anybody to tell me how many jelly beans were in the jar before you could vote? Why you keep coming down on me? Is it possible we can forget all of that and start from scratch? And no, we can't. We have to be able to share with you what it is that individuals went through, other human beings, so that you can have a grasp of how they may approach you and how you can diffuse that. And this is where I love where my pastors that I'm on here with, they said, and we can do it through Christ. Understand also, though, that there are those individuals that don't have any concept of living with Christ, of being Christ-like. And so as a result, our work is even cut out for us even more. But it's there. And for the Arizona Faith Network, it's a conglomeration of different religions. But what happened after the Black Lives Matter movement kicked off the way that it did this past summer, we stepped forward and we started a series using Eyes on the Prize in order to go over from civil rights, at least till now, to try to help individuals and educate individuals so they could talk to their congregations, so they could have dialogue with members of their church. And it's been extremely helpful. And people have learned a lot, and they keep coming back every other week we're going on week 14, and we're looking for now new material in order to go over. So I strongly encourage you to do that. February the 22nd at 6:30 we'll be on, and just the Arizona Faith Network.
Thank you for that, Reverend. Pastor Brian, I believe that you were also about to jump in there.
No, I can't keep following Pastor Reverend. No,
I should.
Can't keep doing it. No, but and I appreciate everything Pastor Rich said. For me, I would say it like this and make it simple. We two individuals don't necessarily have to have the same motives in order to try to accomplish a single goal. And so my statement would be to the individual who doesn't want to recognize all of the issues that slavery had caused, or Jim Crow caused, or the inequities into the justice system, both from and I'd like to say this as well, both from a racial and a economic standpoint. There's injustice there, inequities there. But I would tell that individual, you don't have to do it for me or my people, my race, or my community, or those in my circle, but do it for the good of the community. Assist for the good of the community. If you want your community to be better, if you want your property values to rise, if you don't want crime to be persistent within your community, then if you don't agree that you are a part of the originating problem, then do it for the community. Because the end result is, I can do it because I want to see my brothers and sisters be raised out of poverty. I want to do it because I want to see my brothers and sisters have a chance at life, and some of those generational curses that have been placed on them because of inequities be broken. But you can do it because of the now. Because you want to see property values grow, you want to see economic growth in your community. You can do it for those reasons. And we may have different motives, but we may have a dialogue in terms of coming to a place where we can come have resolution. And when we have this resolution, then we can work cooperatively together to attain the end goal, which is just to make people better. So that's my comment to those. You don't have to acknowledge that there was issues in the past. Let's just do it for the now.
And I am the type of individual I like to challenge people, especially my psych students. So in class, one of the things I usually ask them to reflect on, I say, let's think about the news. And I even ask them that as they go forward throughout the semester, watch the news. If a Black individual or brown individual committed crime, you would hear within seconds that it was a Black individual or brown individual. No question asked. If a white individual committed crime, chances are they're going to say they have an undisclosed person at an undisclosed location, and you probably won't find out that white individual did that crime until sometime later on next week, even if that, maybe a couple of weeks. Or if you hear about a Black person doing a mass shooting, they're a thug, they're a criminal. If you hear about a white person doing a mass shooting, there's something wrong with them mentally, and we need to get them help. And so that helps them to begin to see that there is a different perspective. But even if that's a little bit too harsh for some people, I say, think about your job. Find somebody that's your coworker that's of African American descent and ask them to tell you the story about how they got to that position. Don't ask them how hard it was. Just ask them to tell their story and listen to their story and see the differences in their story and your story. Or if you look at most of the major companies, look at how many people, I think we still are under 10% of most major positions and major corporations in this country. It's still not there. You look in the classroom, and then most of my classroom, I tell them, look around the classroom. There's usually one black male, if one, and most of the time, if I have a couple of black sisters, but otherwise, there's not that many black individuals in my classroom. And this is in a predominantly Hispanic and African American school. And there's still a shortage of bodies in those seats. So I have them to look at their situation where they are. We don't have to go back in history. Let's talk about why we're still talking about this problem today. Because today we see from history the results today. The results of what they did in the past is what we call white privilege today. You may not see it because you wear it, but we see it because we have to fight against it. And so it helps them to begin to see that there is a reason for them to be at the table, even if they don't see it. Because I think one time, I'm going to say this and I'm going to be quiet. And this is when I was a kid. Even as a teenager, one of my friends told me I used to say the SHIT word all the time. And I was like, man, you lying. I don't do that. Like, what are you talking about? He's like, yeah, you do. Like every other word, you say that word. You like, it's part of you. It's just, you said. And so I had to start listening to myself. And eventually I caught on that I was actually doing what he said I was doing. And I had to change my language. The same is true when people used to tell me I have a mean mug. Like, I don't have a mean mug. I'm happy. What are you talking about? Like, man, you look mean. Like, and so I have to pay attention to my facial expression because for me, growing up in the ghetto in Chicago, having a mean mug is what you did. It wasn't a part of being mad. It was a part of saying, don't mess with me. It just is. And so I have to realize that so sometimes people just don't see because they are in it. And it's not until they get outside of it and look back at it that they see what's there.
Thank you for that. I don't think you have a mean mug at all. Go ahead, Pastor McCauley.
Yeah, I agree, Corey. I think you're like that is not a mean mug. I've seen it. Yeah, that's too good of a smile. I wanted to thank all three of you who just spoke. But I think that part of having a panel like this with people with different skin colors, especially brothers in Christ who share so much in common, but we do have different experiences, we have to have hard conversations. And Jermaine, you brought up a couple of questions here, one involving white privilege, someone who's blind to their white privilege, but it was also about perpetrators in general. But I think I've been really influenced by Dr. James Cone, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Black theologians who are very good at understanding a truth that it's none of your jobs as Black men or women to convince white people of their white privilege. That's Pastor Daniel and I's jobs. We have an extra responsibility to communicate to our brothers and sisters who are white, especially if they refuse to see what we mean by privilege. And that's such a heightened word, it's a threatening word to people. I have this conversation with white people all the time and their radars go up because what they hear is they hear me saying, you're a racist. And nobody wants to be labeled a racist, even if they're the biggest racist in the world. David Duke doesn't think he's a racist. And the guy's as racist as they come. I mean, he's the grand wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. He doesn't think he's a racist. Nobody thinks they're racist. And so when someone's flag goes up that you're calling them racists, they go to all the, me too, this is part of my story. And we go to all the white tropes of I've got a Black friend, or they come to these things and their defense mechanisms kick in, right? Like I'm not a racist and I can prove it to you because I have a Black friend on Facebook. But the thing about white privilege that I try to help people with, because I love them, because I do believe in liberation for the oppressed and the oppressor. And in the history of America, white people have played as the role of oppressor. Again, even if we're not personally implicated, That is the exact systems in which we're under. And the only way to find that freedom, I feel like, is to love those people and to try to take those defense mechanisms down a little bit and say, listen, privilege is a good thing. And the first thing that I always do is try to point to a different type of privilege that's less threatening. So all of us on this screen right here, we're lacking much lady representation today. And although we have different experiences with our skin color, all of us have male privilege. And for some reason, that's a little easier to recognize. It's not quite as threatening to be like, yeah, generally speaking, if you look at the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, you look at it by gender, not just race. I think there's only like 17 out of 500 Fortune 500 companies that are women CEOs. And so I find a connection point and a bridge there with white people often to see other types of privilege that they might experience. It might be heterosexual privilege, it might be male privilege, it might be economic privilege. If it's somebody that has economic resources, they typically are insecure about that, and they typically can see that having money is a form of privilege. And privilege in and of itself is not bad. Privilege is a good thing. It's what we do with it. It's how we wield those levers and those relationships that are so important. But I just want to thank all of you for what you said specifically. But I'm really interested, Jermaine, as we're talking through this specifically about these systems, because all of us are pastors. We're people. We love people, and we love taking somebody, as you guys so eloquently said, on an individual level. Where are they at? How do we help them? But at the same time, the church, especially the white church, has played a historic role in causing these inequalities. I'm a huge nerd of Civil War history, and slaveholder religion that led up in the antebellum South to the Civil War is not that different than white evangelicalism today. And that's where I get a little on edge when we talk about some of these things, and especially when I thought, Jermaine, you had a great question. It really brought to the forefront our skin colors when Daniel and I answered the question about how we would approach an African-American young person versus the way you guys would. There's a huge difference, because if I, as a white man, is telling a black kid that they need to forgive the system, that sure feels a lot like the Civil War and what slaveholder religion looked like for a long time. And of course, as we all know, that didn't end. I mean, that goes all the way through civil rights, and it still exists today. And I think maybe one of the most valuable things that I would love talking to you guys about is what it looks like today, the relationship with the black church, the white church, diverse church, and systems of our theology that perpetrate this inequality and continue to cause this division.
And that's a great question, Pastor. And I've actually jotted something similar to that down that we'll get to in just a bit. But you were touching on a question that you'll see on your screens for all of our viewers at home, which is, someone asked, how can, our white siblings, white allies, get involved to help offer restoration, make a push for justice? And I think you answered that question beautifully. I'd like to open that up to the rest of the folks here too. What do we envision that looking like, for a concerned white individual who wants to help make a push to rectify some of the harm done by these systems in our history in America towards Black individuals? How can they get involved in your mind?
Let me jump in here just for a second. It's been some time now. I'm not even talking about how long, but let's say a long time ago, I got involved with a program called Anytown. And Anytown is where you would take as many as about 100 different students between 14 and 18 years old. We would go to Prescott for a week, and we would teach them through different exercises about their own biases and prejudices. And at the same time, we would address the issue of privilege, and we would address the issues of self-identity. And in so doing, by the time we got to the end, and we do this now with Gatortown, with Xavier, and other high schools have done the same thing on a smaller scale. But we provided them with the tools in order to first understand how to reach out to someone else and to look at someone else as another person, as opposed to that black male with the ugly mug or along those lines. And as a result, they were able to start having conversations, start building that relationship, because there was some understanding. Because after that that entire week, we flushed out a whole lot from a whole lot of different groups. I don't care what religion it was. I don't care what the issue. Sometimes we had to target in on what I would always call the popular issue. But we would do that with the youth, and it would help as far as getting them to understand how to bridge that gap. And one story in particular, I remember there was this kid, he was bona fide hardcore skinhead. But the person that he finally, and she went to the same school, the person that he finally was able to reach an understanding with and start coming out of that was a young lady who was Jewish. And she kept sharing with him because she had been trained empowered on how to approach different issues and to have them discussed. When I went, let's fast forward. Members of the Sikh community, there was it was in the Midwest, there was a terrible situation where 15 individuals were killed in the temple. And we were here in Phoenix, and the community wanted to hold a vigil. And we held this vigil. And it was, I will never forget, it was at night. And we're walking through Cesar Chavez Plaza, candles, looking at the photos of those who had been murdered. And this woman walked up to me. She was white, and she said, she just pulled on my jacket and said, "Gerald, we need camp." And I looked over at her like, first I didn't recognize her, and I said, "Excuse me?" She said, "We need camp." And when she said it the second time, I realized what she was saying. We need an environment whereby we can sit down and honestly talk about issues of privilege and identity, honestly talk about those things that make us who we are, to be able to recognize the good in you and you recognize the good in me, and then to move forward from there. Having those tools in order to make what we're trying to achieve, which means humanity that we can work together, to actually happen. Now, mind you, pandemic hits. Xavier calls and says, "We're not going to do Gator Time anymore." I've done like 15 of these, all right, every year. And then I get a call the other day from the co-director, and they said, "Gator Town wants to do it again, but this time we're going to do it for the whole school." And so they recognized that they had it right there at their fingertips as far as a way to get the students to start talking about respecting one another, regardless of what background they come from. Because those girls that go to Xavier, not all of them are fluent. A lot of them come in on scholarships. But it's beautiful to see how they are coming together for the purposes of addressing the same issues we're talking about tonight. And if we do it with our youth in particular, it helps to make a better tomorrow. Because what it does is it creates conversations within the home with the moms and the dads. I was in a program once where this young man, I will never forget, this guy walks up, this black guy walks up and says, "Hey," this is when we're all wearing froze and everything. He said, "Can you braid Maurice's hair?" Maurice was a white guy from Texas. I said, "What?" He said, "He wants to have a fro tomorrow." I said, "Okay." So he sat down and I braided his hair. And he told me this story about how his mother and father said that all blacks had tails. And he called home and told him that that was not true. And all the things they said was a lie. And they told him, "If you want to believe that, then don't come back home." Well, the next day he walked into his class and he had this beautiful fro. And it started about 8:30. And then about 10 o'clock, it starts going down because it didn't have the body in it that was necessary. But for those 2.5 hours, he was able to say, "I feel just like you," just with a hairstyle.
Thank you for that, Reverend Richard. I appreciate that. Pastor Daniel, we haven't heard from you in a bit, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this. How do you bring folks into the fold, allies who maybe don't have that lived Black experience? How can they get involved in promoting equity and justice?
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And one, just thank you, Reverend Richard, for keeping the reminder in front of us that as pastors, it's easy to get stuck in our Christian environments where we're hanging out with Christians and so forth. And so thank you for that reminder. Personally, I find myself out in the community and doing my absolute best to relate to those who are disadvantaged. And again, I may not be able to relate with them at every single level, the obvious one of skin color and so forth. But I think when we can take not necessarily the focus, but when we can enlarge that to go, man, trauma's trauma. And we all have our own sense of trauma, regardless of the mechanism that had come to us, then we all have that common ground to deal with as well. I remember talking to a youth evangelist, Reggie Dabbs, who's a wonderful African-American preacher. And he would always start off by saying, I don't need to know the avenue of your pain to be able to relate to the shame that produced. And so I can understand from that relational standpoint as well. So the way I would want to bring somebody to the table is similar to Pastor Charlie, is I take that responsibility on as a white Christian here who understands the injustice, who understands the segregation and the disadvantages that result because of that. But just real quickly, going to Pastor Charlie's comment about theology that produces those systems of inequality. To me, man, if you're subscribed to a system of theology that produces any type of religious superiority, crucify your theology. You have that responsibility to do so. Because I think, and again, just getting back to my heart, making this a pure gospel issue, then it removes, or at least it causes my personal ideology or even my philosophies to take a back seat to the truth of what the Bible says, as Jesus is, so also are we in this world. And so really, I'm one of those pastors, and I'm not separating myself from others, but man, I want to be amongst the disadvantaged. I want to be amongst those who wake up to a degree of suffering that I don't, simply for the sake of relatability, but hopefully for the purpose of producing compassion in my heart that allows me to not just to sympathize with them, but to empathize with them. And if I can stir up compassion in my heart and then invite others to walk that journey with me, then I'm no longer just having a philosophical understanding of trauma or suffering. I'm actually walking it out, and I'm visualizing it day in and day out by those who are really suffering, by those who are really in that place of trauma. And again, being a gospel-minded person, to me, I have to go back to the thought that my ideology or personal philosophies, they'll bring a person to a certain point, but it's the Word of God and true theology that's ultimately going to accomplish the work of God. And to me, that becomes my greatest means of evangelism. And so when I talk about being a gospel issue, I'm talking about all the way from those who may not know Jesus now, but through the relational walking with, as Reverend Richard had said, by getting out there and being amongst them, being that person of relatability, then that causes me to, what the Bible says, become a soul winner. And Proverbs 11 verse 30 says that the tree of righteousness, or the fruit of righteousness, is the tree of life, and he who wins souls is wise. And if we're going to win the soul of a person, we've got to win them emotionally by understanding the mechanisms of their trauma, but we've also got to win them mentally as well by offering them a biblical thought process that allows them to take their focus off of the trauma and onto the truth of freedom and of wholeness and liberation. But it also gives me the permission to win them from a behavioral standpoint as well too. And that's where we get to see holistic transformation take place. One, there's the understanding of the emotional trauma that happens. And that's part of the soul, right? We understand the makeup of the soul to be the way we feel, the way we think, that produces the way we behave. And so I have the responsibility as a man who prioritizes the gospel to win people at that emotional level by understanding that their trauma is real, and by finding as many points of relatability as possible. But two, helping them to change hopefully their thought process. If this is a gospel issue, then we're transformed by the renewing of our minds, is what Romans 12 speaks of. And then I can begin to see their behaviors change as well. And I think that works on both sides of the coin. I believe that works for those who currently are stubborn and refusing to acknowledge the historical means of trauma, and how to get them to the table is by getting them out there and helping them walk with people who are in trauma, inviting them to the reality of, yeah, we do have certain privileges, but then those privileges don't give us permission to ignore and certainly not to escape the reality of people suffering. And so to bring them to that table, and then you can begin to bridge that gap from an emotional standpoint, from a thought process standpoint, to change the process of a person's arrival at certain conclusions, and then hopefully changing the behavior that would follow so it doesn't perpetuate itself also.
Thank you for that, Pastor Daniel. That was beautiful, and I agree with every word you said. Believe it or not, gentlemen, it has been a 4 hour and 15 minutes. I don't know where that time went, but there are two questions I feel like it'd be remiss to skip here, that I want to ask to all of you and give every last one of you an opportunity to answer, to kind of help us put a nice, neat bow on this conversation here. And the first question is, in your mind, what role does the church have in promoting equity, justice, and reconciliation for the Black community and for oppressed peoples? And anyone feel free to jump in, but we're going to touch on everyone here. What role do you think the church has?
Yeah, I'll jump in just real briefly on that. And Reverend Lewis had talked about it. I'm not sure if we were live, but she talked about that passage of scripture that says, "My people perish for a lack of knowledge," talking about the people of God. But that word knowledge is so much greater than just the intellectual transfer of information. And that's where we see ideologies and philosophies come into play. Is the majority of the time that's going to be, at first, it's going to be just an intellectual transfer of information. But the root word of knowledge means having come to a conclusion through an experience. So you can't argue with somebody who has a validated experience, and that becomes their truth. That becomes their place where they can land and say, this is my truth because this is my experience, and my experience led me to this conclusion. And so what role does the church have to play? I think one of the dangers that we're currently living in right now is COVID caused the church to leave its comforts of sanctuaries, of padded pews and chairs, and it caused us to get outside of our four walls. At least that was the opportunity that we took advantage of. And so my concern right now is that we're going to migrate back to this place of to where we are no longer aware of the reality of people suffering. And so I believe that the role of the church, the role of myself as a white pastor, man, and I pastor a very culturally diverse church, and I begged God, don't let me pastor a white church. Please, God, I know the difficulties, but I'm having a culturally diverse church, but nonetheless, getting out amongst where people are suffering. If you want to see the power of the gospel, just take it to where people are suffering, and you'll see the gospel do its best work in those times. And so I think that that's our responsibility is one we've got to we have to acknowledge our own dysfunction and ineffectiveness when it comes to the reparation and the restoration of this critical issue. And then we've got to be willing to walk amongst those who are currently experiencing that, to see ourselves become soul winners. So that's my approach as a pastor, and to the people of the Christian faith that I interact with.
Thank you for that, Pastor Daniel. Pastor Brian, I want to go to you. What do you feel is the responsibility of the church in this conversation?
Very thing, but I think one of the things that the church has to continue to do, my statement is that we should be influencer of the influencers, right? The church should provide some information so that individuals can have the appropriate barometer when dealing with each other. Set the framework of how the discussion would go. Ensure that the information that is exchanged in a way in which there's some level of understanding, some level of concern, sympathy, empathy, whatever is required, so that you understand the plight of the other individual. And the church can provide that, being that conduit, so that information can be exchanged between different parties. And I think that's really important. If I'm allowed, just for 1 minute, in the previous discussion too, one of the questions was, what can the white churches do, or the white pastors do in terms of, and I may be paraphrasing that some, in terms of ensuring that this communication, ensuring that these kind of discussions take place. And I would offer to you and to other individuals as well, let's not wait till crises occur, so that to ensure that there's dialogue, or to establish dialogue. I work in a company, a corporate American. I'm an IT manager. In my organization, there's probably 1,000 people, and of those 1,000 people within my individual organization, it's 3 blacks. I go to lunch every day by myself. When I was in the office, I do all of these things or whatever. When they had the George Floyd incident that occurred, I was getting calls from the CEO. I was getting calls from VPs. I was getting calls from all people from all spectrums within our organization, trying to see if I was all right, and try to establish a dialogue with me. And in that context, I would say it was noticed, but at that point, I felt like it was a little late. So keeping the dialogue open, I think that's the main thing. That's what the church can do. Keep the dialogue open. The levels of the avenues for communication. The church has always done that to ensure that parties from various sides can meet in a place where they can peacefully discuss even their disagreements. And I think if we do that, if we provide as clergy and as churches, if we provide a platform so the dialogue can occur, we'll find out that people are good. People do want to see their fellow brothers grow and mature, and their communities, amen, go forward and go higher. So that's what my thing is. Let's just keep the dialogue open, and I think that'll be a huge part of the problem, a huge part of resolving the problem.
Thank you for that, Pastor Bryant. Yep. And if there's no dialogue, we got a comment, then go find it. Great. It's still same question. What role do you envision the church having in these efforts?
Well, I tell you, I used to be the pastor where Pastor Moore is now, and it was the most diverse congregation that I've had. And one of the things that I enjoyed doing was to try to find things in history as it pertained to everyone within my congregation. And so consequently, we all got a chance to learn about one another, regardless of your race. And we were represented by each one of the races. And so we celebrated Native American History Month. We celebrated Hispanic Heritage Month. We celebrated Black Heritage Month. We celebrated all those things that brought us together as a nation, that in the way that we hope for. And each of the men here, they know the type of authority that God has given us and blessed us with. And with that, we have a responsibility in order to try to bring our congregations together. You know, I was watching last night the second half of The Black Church. It was a PBS special. And it was really interesting as I was watching it, that one of the comments that they made reference to was Dr. King, where he said, 11 o'clock on any given Sunday, it's the most segregated time in America. And if we don't do anything else from our pulpits and from within our congregation, if we don't do anything else but to make sure that we not only talk about Christ, but we also talk about the contributions of others and how we became a nation the way that we are, and that we can still love this nation, because this is our nation. This is ours. You know, it's funny. I was listening to Pastor Moore, you know, talking about being from the Southside Chicago. And by the way, I do love the Sox. one of the things about it is when I meet him, or I met him, or anybody else, and they say, I'm from Chicago, we have a relationship right there. Next question is, what part? One says Southside, one says West Side. Well, okay, we'll live with it, all right? But we have a relationship because we understand what our city's about and what we know. When you have a congregation that comes together, usually because of that church, they have some sort of relationship. You know, I didn't realize last night the incredible power of the Church of God in Christ, how they just exploded as far as the number of members they had and what they were able to achieve. And I sit back and I look at it and I say, in each one of those churches, we had a responsibility to keep our congregations together. And today we have even a greater responsibility to educate our congregations about those who may be in other churches that don't look like us, and to let them know that they too are proud of their heritage and their history, and let us appreciate it.
Thank you for that, Reverend. And you name dropped Pastor Moore, so Pastor Moore, I'd like to come over to you.
Okay, I was just gonna say ditto. He said everything I was thinking about saying. So I was because I just watched the Black Church, and I actually watched both episodes today. And so I spent a good part of this morning watching that. And the watching it and listening to it, and I'm gonna say this and get to my other thought is, in watching that, I've watched Black people try to get up and then they got pushed back down. Watch them try to get up again, then they got pushed back down. Watch them try to get up again, and they got pushed back down. 2021, watched them try to get up again, and they tried to push them back down. It didn't go as well. And so this is a cycle that is perpetuated. It continues. And my fear is that we are still a long way off from getting to that place where we can actually sit down and live the Martin Luther King dream, to where we all come together in fellowship. And even at Harbor Chapel, like Pastor Richard, one of the first things I said is, hey, we're in the community. From what I hear, there's Mexican Americans near us, there's Asians, there's all of these other groups around. Why we need to invite them in. Let's invite them in. Let's have lunch or dinner. And let's talk about what it is you do. Matter of fact, y'all come in and y'all run the worship service, and we're going to enjoy what you do so that we can learn from you what your experience is like. And I think that goes even into the European church, is having that conversation and being willing to sit down and just say, tell me your story. Because I see America from my story. What is America to you from your story? How does that impact you? Because they're going through an experience too. Believe me, I know that, and I just said this, I know there's a lot of good brothers and sisters, because I have friends that of European persuasion that I sincerely want to love and honor and respect Black people, but they don't get the whole story. And so there's a lack there that they can't have. And until we sit down and have those conversations, they really don't have the whole story. They miss a huge portion of what our experience is. But also on the same tip, we are missing a huge portion of what their experience is and how they are trying to make this bridge. But in some cases, when they try to come across the bridge, they get pushed back across, or it's too scary, or the people are looking at them like they're strange and wondering why they're on the other side. And you know us, we give them the up and down, look them over like, why are you over here? You don't belong here. What you doing in our circle? Why? And we start asking questions like, what brought you into our group? Why are you here? And they sincerely are trying to make a connection. And so we have, and to me, this is the thought. Let's figure out a way, getting back to what Pastor Brian was talking, let's figure out a way to create a safe space to just sit down and talk. Let's have worship. Y'all lead the worship service, play your music, play your songs, do it your way. We're going to sit back and enjoy you. After a while, we're going to eat your food, and then we can sit down at the table and talk. And we are committed to doing that at Harbor Chapel after the COVID passed, and we can get back together. But we are committed to having that experience. And even if we could now, we would open up it. If we had enough table and space, we would do it. But let's have those experiences. Let's sit down and just talk and build those relationships. And I think that's the most important thing, even to getting people into the circle that want to come in, is once they realize it's safe, they're probably more open to having those conversations. And I think that's part of the challenge. But I think it's also realizing that the church has to be instrumental and intentional. It's probably the word I want to say. The church has to be intentional about reaching out and saying, come in, let us fellowship together, because we all belong to one God. We all have the same Lord. We all have the same faith. We all come from same fellowship. We all are under one Lord. We have our one faith, our one baptism. We all follow Christ. If we can't say anything else, we can say we all are brothers and sisters in Christ. And if that's good enough to sit down and talk and build a relationship, great. Because I don't want to go through the colorblind thing, but yeah. But anyway, that's one thought.
Hey, can I jump in on that thought real quickly? And that's the hope. And I'll just lay this out there again. Is that's the hope of what we're trying to do, particularly on the February 27th.
Sure.
When we get together as pastors and our wives, I believe that we have to teach, but I believe we've also got to practice that provides a model for people to view as well. When pastors can get together, and I can, Reverend Corey, when I can share my story and you can share your story, that provides a safe platform, but it provides a model that can, I believe, be reproduced over and over and over again amongst our churches. So we're doing more than just teaching them something. We're actually putting into practice this biblical model. And so again, man, I would just love and be incredibly honored to have you guys join us with your wives on that 27th. That's the whole idea of what this is about, is getting us together so that we can address these, so that we can build those platforms of relationship and keep the dialogue going, and even allow the dialogue to gain greater momentum. So again, that it can be reproduced and just have that opportunity to, again, to be seen more than just taught.
And just to follow up on that thought with Pastor Daniel real quick, to get into the field together. One of the things the military did to break up segregation was to put them together. Got work together, figure it out, work it out. And so through working together, through struggling together, through trying to figure out challenges together, they develop an appreciation for one another, and that got rid of segregation in the military. They just throw them together.
Thank you for that. Let's. So go ahead, Pastor Dan.
Just real quickly, we have a model of success. When we were doing the prayer meeting up at the hospital, we were doing it was centered but primarily around just the devastation that COVID was having. But what it turned into on the day of Pentecost, which we know on the day of Pentecost, that culturally diverse audience and group of people that were there. So we just followed that. We called people of color. We called people of all types of backgrounds to a time together to pray. And we had a number of our African-American clergy praying over our white chief of police and some of his staff. And then we took the Caucasian pastors and we prayed over our beautiful mayor, Mayor Evans. And we provided that model. And I'll tell you, there was about 1,500 people that came to that and saw a real model of interaction, of doing life together. And I'd love to see some of those things just continue to gain momentum. And again, not teaching it only, but practicing what we're teaching as well.
I'm going to take it a step further and say that not only should we as Christian pastors come together and try to bridge that gap, but once we're able to achieve that, or if we see the opportunity, let's do the same thing with our Jewish brothers and sisters, or Muslim brothers and sisters, Sikh, Buddhists, and whomever it may be. One of the things that I've learned through studying different religions, and that is Baha'i has it's one umbrella, and we are all fit under that umbrella, and we all go to God in our own way. And I have individuals who would put their life on the line for me, and I on my life on the line for them. And we don't believe in the same faiths. but we're all God's people, and we're all children of God. And when we can respect that and identify with it in such a way that we see the good that they have and they see the good that we have, it's a better place to live.
Thank you for that, Reverend. I want to go over to Pastor Charlie. Hopefully there's some bread left for you, and just ask you this same question as we round out. What role do you envision the church having kind of in this push for truth, justice, and reconciliation?
Yeah, I think I would say to Reverend Corey, we're doing that right now. I think I want to thank the Murdoch Community Center and the Black Lived Experience we're kind of doing this, and there's all these people watching. So I just want to celebrate the joy it is to be a part of it. I do want to take a little different angle though with the church question, because I think it's a big one. And I think when I was able to be here last time, I shared my favorite passage from Dr. Martin Luther King in his letters from Birmingham jail, specifically written to white pastors. So to me, basically, he's in jail, and he wrote this section of that letter that changed my life dramatically about the way I viewed whiteness and blackness and churches and their role and how we do this. But he said that he's not afraid of the Ku Klux Klan, and he's not afraid of the white council. He said what he's most afraid of is the white moderate. He said the white moderate who prefers the negative peace, which is an absence of tension, to the positive peace, which is the presence of justice. And that phrase, the negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to the positive peace, which is the presence of justice, literally changed my life, because that embodied my experience of whiteness in Christianity. Is that I thought peace meant we all get along and we love each other individually. And I was completely blind to the negative kind of peace that is, just kind of a unity for unity's sake, while ignoring massive injustices. So for me, I think one of the roles of the church is to agitate and to not necessarily just seek unity. To me, the calls for unity after what happened on January 6th ring hollow. A Confederate flag was flown in the capital of the United States. An insurrection happened. And you can't just, as white people or moderates or conservatives, just demand that we all of a sudden have unity right away because of our discomfort. What was revealed there, this was a revelation, it was revealing. That was an image of many images of the white supremacy and the issues that are still a core part of this nation. And so what I would end on is saying that the church has to have a prophetic imagination. We have to be prophets. We have to speak truth to power. We absolutely can't get in bed with power, which is what white evangelicalism, specifically Protestants and also some white Catholics, have done. They've aligned themselves with powerful groups and basically perpetrated and actually increased the polarization and the racial tensions in this country. So I feel like the church has a prophetic role to speak truth even when it's not popular. I think it has a role to make people be uncomfortable sometimes instead of comfortable, especially if you're in a people group like me who has every form of privilege. It's okay for the church to make me uncomfortable and make me think about things that don't make me feel positive, happy vibes. I think that's a really important role that the church has in this conversation, that I think that the Black church has done really well for a long time. I think of John Lewis. I think of Reverend Warnock right now. I think of those that have led the way, speaking truth to power and taking a side. I think that the thing that's so hard for me to watch is so many people try to ride the fence, not take a side, not speak truth to power, just for the sake of a negative piece of, I don't want to have tension at the Thanksgiving table. I want people to like me, instead of standing up for real justice when there's real deep-rooted racism that has to be dealt with in a real way. And I think the church has a very big role in having a voice and speaking into that. So that would be my thought.
And how much I appreciate all of you taking the time out of your evening and have this conversation. As a young Black man myself, studying our history and civil rights, studying progress and protest, a lot of the icons in the civil rights movement were spiritual leaders. A lot of the folks that we study in the movement were spiritual leaders of churches, pastors, reverends, priests. And so to have you all here continuing that tradition, that mantle, and taking that responsibility seriously, I think is such a major pillar of moving forward. And I just want to extend my sincerest gratitude for that. Because I know it's not easy, but it makes a difference.
Jermaine, you
Um,
understand what your
you know, so
responsibility is now, right? Jermaine?
but for the sake of time,
Jermaine? I think you froze
yep,
on me.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You understand your responsibility now. We have now passed the baton on to you. Now you have to run the race and share this with others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, you may do, Reverend. So I dang sure have to. I can't sit here all night with you and not. So I know you hold me accountable. I appreciate you folks.
Wow. We are at the end of a wonderful conversation. And I think it was Pastor Richard before we went live that said that this broadcast this evening was going to last about 3 or 4 years. And we certainly could go on at least for one more year, or at least until the end of this year, with this conversation, which only means that this is just the tip of the iceberg, that indeed we need to come back and continue this conversation. I, again, am still very humbled to be in the presence of all of these men of God. It is truly beautiful when brethren can come together and dwell in unity. And that is indeed what has happened this evening. And we are truly blessed for what our ears have heard and what our eyes have seen. As we had this conversation, the question came to my mind, is there a balm in Gilead? And so as we come to the end of half a year of conversation this evening, I say yes, that there is indeed a balm in Gilead that definitely has the power to make one whole. And that is so what we need right now. And that is exactly why we have this broadcast to bring about healing, to raise to put the conversation out there for us to be safe, to feel safe, to have these types of conversations. And I would just like to, I did this back on the East Coast. I would just like to, once we are over this pandemic and we can once again come back together and fellowship in person, I would like to challenge our clergymen here. Let's close church for one day, for one Sunday, and have one big church where the whole community, all of the churches come together under one roof and we worship the Most High, the living God, together. And that is how we begin to become one, to have this unity that we're seeking. Why? I remember back the country churches, our Geechee Gullah churches, every fifth Sunday, someone hosted all of the churches. And that way, everyone had the opportunity to say that we all came together to worship and fellowship together as a community. So I thank you all. We thank you all for being here this evening. Such wisdom, such grace, such power in this box. And for that, we are truly grateful. I'm going to bring, I think we lost Brother Jermaine and we have him
I'm back.
back. There he is. Thank you, Brother Jermaine, for facilitating this conversation and keeping all of these men of God engaged in this conversation about trauma, about justice, about reformation, about reconciliation. This has truly been a blessing to all of us, and to our viewers especially. We thank you for not thinking it robbery to come and spend this time with us this evening. And I'm going to put something up. And just give me a moment to read this, just in case it may be difficult to read. The Lived Black experience is dedicated to fully engaging the community in all aspects of the lived Black experience and facilitating community dialogues regarding if that it lead to mutual understanding, respect, and reconciliation. We're housed in the historic Murdoch Community Center, which is located on the site of the old Dunbar Elementary School. Dunbar was desegregated almost 2 years prior to Brown versus the Board of Education, and the school system here was held up by the NAACP nationally as a model for education. We're asking you at this time that you would take a few minutes to complete this survey. And in doing so, you are helping us to continue to provide the community with relevant and timely programming. We are so grateful to you this evening. We thank you for joining us, and we know that this is only part one of this particular conversation. We have indeed had church this evening. We show it too we went over a little time. And if you have any experience with the old Southern Baptist Black church, this is what we do. So thank you all, bless you all. And until we meet again, go in grace.